In this video, I'm going to share 12 habits that the top 1% of guitarists do to become incredible musicians and play effortlessly. My name is Diego Alonso, and I've been a professional guitarist and teacher for over 20 years, and have taught well over 20,000 guitar lessons to date. In graduate school, I focused my master's thesis on evidence-based practice and performance strategies, and that research, combined with years of experience, has helped me identify the 12 expert habits that I'm going to share with you today. So let's jump right in. Habit number 1 is relaxation. The best performers in the world practice and perform with as much relaxation as possible. And that means they don't use any more physical effort or mental effort than what's needed to produce the sound and emotion or expression that they're looking for. So when you practice, make sure to eliminate tension in your shoulders, certainly in your hands, your neck, your back, your jaw, wherever tension can occur. Take a moment to take a deep breath and relax. And this is especially true if you're working on difficult passages in your music. Maybe it's a new technique that you're developing that's difficult. Those difficult moments are perfect moments to stop, take a deep breath, and relax. The worst thing that you can do is try to power through it by forcing your hands to do what they're not ready to do, muscling through things. Remember, this is not weightlifting. We don't want to develop a bunch of strength in our hands and fingers. We want agility, and we want relaxation, we want musicality. Habit number 2 is to have a deep presence and emotional connection with the music that you're playing and practicing. If you think of your favorite performers performing on stage, chances are they look like they're totally into the music. And this is true during practice as well, even if it's just an exercise, if it's just a technique that's being developed, maybe one measure of music in a difficult spot in the music, it doesn't matter. The point of music is to instill some kind of emotional response in the listener. And that's going to be true for ourselves as players. We don't just want to go through the motions and play the notes just for the technique. We want to play the notes so that we can feel something emotional, whether it's joy, whether it's some kind of, maybe it's something somber, maybe it's nostalgic. It doesn't matter what it is. It should create some kind of emotion, whether you're playing just a basic technique or a piece of music. So next time you work on your music, make sure that you're prioritizing not just relaxation like I mentioned before, but your deep emotional connection and presence with your music. Number 3 is to have a clear focus on your short-term goals and long-term goals, and make sure that you hold yourself accountable for them. The top guitarists have their long-term goals in mind. For example, maybe somebody wants to play Recuerdos de la Alhambra by Tárrega, or maybe Dos Partes de Mí by Antonio Rey. It doesn't matter. If it's Recuerdos de la Alhambra, that's the long-term goal, is obviously to play the piece, but the short-term goal is going to be what you do in each practice session. And each practice session should include small steps that will get you to the long-term goal. So if it's Recuerdos de la Alhambra, for example, then that's a tremolo piece, classical tremolo, it's a 4-note tremolo. So every practice session should be devoted to working on improving your tremolo, maybe working on the chord shapes that are in the piece, the shifts that are in the piece, working on connection between the notes and the phrases. Dos Partes de Mí by Antonio Rey has a lot of arpeggios and they're really very fast, so they're double arpeggios. Maybe you want to work on those, or the backward arpeggios. It doesn't matter. Your practice sessions or your short-term goals should be devoted to developing the piece and the techniques that you need, and of course the musical expression, in order to get to those long-term goals. So make sure to have that in place, and one of the best things that you can do is write yourself a practice journal. Write down what you're going to work on for the day and make sure that you hold yourself accountable. Make sure you do it. That way the next day you can look at your practice log, take a look at what you've worked on, and then you know that you're making progress as you look at that practice log later on in the week. Number 4, and probably one of the most important ones, is that experts use deliberate practice steps to solve difficult problems in the music. Now, deliberate practice is simply problem solving with feedback. The biggest mistakes that beginner and intermediate students make is to learn a piece of music or a line of music or technique, it doesn't matter, and when they make a mistake, they stop and start over from the very beginning, try again and see if they can get it the second time. Another mistake occurs or the same one, then they start over again, and it's this constant loop of trying to overcome the error or the technique just by starting over at the beginning. That doesn't work. I have done that. I did that in the past when I was self-taught, and it doesn't work. In fact, it creates a lot more problems than it solves. The better approach is to use deliberate practice. There's a ton of research that backs this up that shows that these problem-solving steps are tremendously efficient and will help you learn faster and improve faster. So the steps are simple. The first step is, when you make a mistake, you want to stop right away and you want to identify that particular problem, the particular error, in isolation. That doesn't mean a whole page. That means your error and maybe 1 or 2 notes before the error occurred. Then the next step you want to do, number 2, is to figure out why the error occurred. let's say I'm working on a piece and the error occurred, it doesn't matter what note, but the error occurred when I placed my third finger down. Maybe the reason for that is because my third finger was too low, or maybe it was too high, or too far to the left, or too far to the right. I've identified a potential problem. The next step is pretty obvious. We want to come up with a solution to that, which is going to counteract the problem. So if my third finger was too low, I want to take steps to bring it up higher. Maybe I need to bring my elbow in. Maybe I need to reach my finger up higher. It doesn't matter. Find a solution to the problem, obviously. Number 4 is to test the solution that you've come up with, but you do that in isolation first. So we have our error. We have 1 or 2 notes before the error, and we're going to try the solution just within those 2 or 3 notes. If that works out, then we can gradually lengthen the phrase at either end. A few notes after the error, a few notes earlier, and we just keep lengthening that phrase until we have a larger phrase of music that makes a little more musical sense. The next step is to reflect on the outcome. This is pretty clear. If you are successful in your test, then you repeat your correction. Ideally, usually a kind of a standard protocol is 5 times correctly in a row, and that's important. And if your test was not successful, then you come up with a new solution and you go through the same steps. Test it again. If it works out, repeat to validate. If not, come up with a new solution. Most of the time, you're going to try 3 different solutions and you're going to come up with one that actually works. It's rare that you can go past 3 or 4 possible solutions, and still not have a solution that works. If that's the case, then what you want to do next is reach out to a teacher. So that brings us to the next step, which is to get feedback. Now, ideally, the best feedback you can get is from a teacher or a coach, somebody who's an expert, particularly somebody who's worked on the same piece of music that you've worked on, so that they understand the challenges that you're running into. Now, in the absence of a teacher or coach, one of the best things you can do is video record yourself or audio record yourself and listen back. So having some auto feedback is really, really crucial. Habit number 5 is succeeding more than failing in practice. And I just want to correct one thing. You'll hear people say succeeding and failing. I like to change failing to just making mistakes, because even if we make mistakes, we're not really failing. The mistakes are actually helping us improve, so long as we take advantage of them and use them as what I call significant improvement opportunities. The worst thing we want to do is try to be perfectionists in practice. If we don't make any mistakes or avoid taking risks or pushing ourselves to the point where we do make mistakes, then there's no growth. We're not going to get better. We're just going to get stuck and super frustrated and possibly injured. I've been there. I've done that. I'm a recovering perfectionist. So allow yourself to make mistakes. The best strategy you can do is having that frame of mind. Allow mistakes to happen and then correct them after the fact. I mentioned earlier when we talked about deliberate practice that a good protocol to follow is roughly 5 correct repetitions in a row for every error. So make sure that you're succeeding more often than you are making mistakes. Now, that said, if you have run across an error for the very first time, then the first time you approach that error, you're going to be exploring a little bit. Don't worry too much about succeeding more than you're making errors. That's your exploration phase. But once you have a solution, then you want to focus on making sure you're executing more correct than incorrect repetitions. A really good success rate that's generally suggested by research is to go for about a 70 to 80% success rate at the beginning. And as you get better at solving your errors, then you can get as close as possible to 100% success as possible. Keeping in mind that we are human beings and that 100% success 100% of the time is just not possible. So know that some errors are going to occur. You just want to make sure those are minor errors rather than major errors. Habit number 6 is consistency. Expert musicians are tremendously consistent with their practice. Now, if you're practicing 1 day a week for 3 hours, 2 or 3 hours, yes, you will make some progress, but it's going to be very, very slow, because between Monday and next Monday that you practice, you will have forgotten quite a bit. The motor skills that you developed in that first day will disappear quite a bit. You're going to lose a lot more than you'll gain just by practicing 1 or even 2 days a week. For my students in my Spanish Guitar Mastery program, I recommend an absolute minimum of 3 days a week, and ideally 5 days a week if you can do it. Ideally, for my students, I recommend an hour of practice 5 days a week. But if you can't do that, try to go for at least 3 days a week and be consistent no matter what. What I think works best is to schedule it in your calendar after or before specific events. For me, for example, my first session is in the morning before breakfast. I start practice at 6:30 in the morning. I practice for about 60 to 70 minutes. My second section is about 1 o'clock after lunch. or sometimes before lunch, but right around the lunch, it's usually 1 o'clock. And then if I have a third session, if I'm lucky to do that, then it's after dinner, after the kids are already in bed. It's usually my wife's turn to put the kids to bed, and I get a few minutes, 20, 30 minutes to practice. So schedule it in your calendar. You're going to find that if you schedule it and you can see it visibly, then you're going to be much more consistent. Habit number 7 is to use interleaved and spaced practice. Interleaved practice is simply taking challenges in your music, identifying them or marking them down. You can title them or tag them as A, B, C, D, doesn't matter. And you work on each of those challenges in sets. So for example, you have challenge A, B, C, and D. You work on each of those for a certain amount of repetitions in time, and then you repeat it all over again. The spacing is obviously built right into the interleaved process, but you want it interleaved. You don't want to just repeat challenge A, try to perfect it all day long, and then challenge B, and then that's it, you're done for the day. You want to make sure you get in a couple of sets. I recommend 3. You can certainly do 2, but I recommend 3 as your kind of general protocol, and not too much repetition of the same thing. You want to keep your total repetitions low. Obviously, make sure, like I mentioned before, succeed more than you make errors, but keep your total repetitions low and then interleave everything. And that's going to get you to improve significantly faster. Not only that, but the interleave process and the built-in spacing that occurs allows us to encode the information that we're improving, that we're learning, into long-term memory rather than short-term memory. If you've had the experience where you practice something a million times one day and then the next day you go sit down to practice the same thing and you find that your gains have kind of half disappeared, it's because that over repetition has encoded that information into short-term memory. In other words, you've forgotten it faster rather than long-term memory, which is obviously going to stick. So interleave practice and space practice is going to be the way to go. Habit number 8 is to use variable practice. Variable practice is just changing things up a little bit. So rather than practicing a line of music or a technique the same way all the time, same speed, same dynamic, same tone, you want to change it up as soon as that technique or phrase sounds the same, feels comfortable, maybe it's too easy, maybe it's too hard. You want to change it up. You could change the volume, play a little louder, play a little quieter, play quiet to loud. You do a crescendo, loud to quiet, decrescendo, bell curve, doesn't matter. Change or vary your dynamic shape. You could do the same thing with your tempo, play a little faster, a little slower, slow to fast, fast to slow. You could change the direction of your chair. So usually when we sit down to play an instrument, we're facing one particular wall. If you change and turn to face a different wall, you're going to get a different sound response, different sound from the wall that the sound is bouncing off of it. So it'll maybe make you play a little bit differently. If you're playing guitar, maybe you can angle the guitar a little bit differently, sit in a different chair. All of that counts. It just creates a little bit of manageable challenge into the phrase of music that you're playing, which is going to help us grow. It's going to help the brain learn not just the phrase, but develop the technique in a more robust manner so that it sticks long term and you can improve faster. Habit number 9 is an absolute game changer. This is going to be recording yourself and listening back immediately. So how many times have you sat down to practice, played a piece or a line of music, thought to yourself, I've got it, and then you move on to something else? I've done that plenty of times. That's fine, but at some point, and I would say sooner rather than later, you want to play your line of music. Once you've memorized it, once you feel like you've got a pretty good musical expression in that phrase, get your recording device. It doesn't have to be video. It can be an audio recording device. Record yourself playing and then pause and listen to it back right away to make sure that the sound that you think you're producing is what you're actually getting out of the guitar, the instrument you're playing. There's research that shows that musicians are really terrible at noticing all the mistakes that they make while performing. And the same thing goes for some of the positive things that we're going for. Maybe the musical expression that we want, the dynamic shape in our heads or when we hear it in our ears is really very wide, but when we hear it in the recording device, it's compressed, and we want to actually widen that when we perform. So record and listen back immediately. That's especially true when you have challenging sections of music, whether it's rhythmic, technical, musical, etc. Number 10 is to practice performing. I can't tell you how many times as a beginner and intermediate students I failed to practice performing. The first time I realized I wasn't ready to perform was when I was on stage in an actual performance, and that was the wrong time to practice performance. I felt terrible. I made a ton of mistakes. It was not a good experience. So you want to preempt that. Avoid feeling like crap on stage. And what you can do is at home, when you've learned just a line of music, memorized, expressed, you've listened back, you've recorded and listened back, you've corrected the expression of it, and tightened things up, then practice performing the line. One simple thing you can do at home, set up your phone, your video. Most of us have, some kind of video phone. Walk out of your room. Imagine one audience member, somebody that you love, who loves you. It could be a group, a concert hall, doesn't matter. Keep it small if you haven't done this before. Walk in the room with that imagination in mind. Sit down, think of the sound of your first few notes, and then play it, just the line. And you do that several times. It doesn't have to be the whole day of practice. Do that 3 to 5 times in one practice session for the line of music that you're doing. I like to do that as I'm learning a piece of music rather than waiting until I'm at the end of the piece of music. Because by the time I'm at the end, I will already have felt very comfortable performing each section of that music. So when I perform the whole thing, it won't feel so difficult. What we want to do is make sure that we have a little bit of adrenaline in our system. We feel a little bit nervous when we're playing a piece of music, because at the end of the day, when we're playing in front of other people, we're going to feel that adrenaline activation, and we have to get used to playing with that sensation. It's not going to go away for most people. The best strategy you can do is to learn how to play with it. And in fact, a lot of research shows that most of us need that kind of adrenaline activation to perform at our peak. So it ends up being a very positive thing if you learn how to control it. So make sure that you add performance practice into your practice routine. Number 11 is having realistic expectations for progress. Expert musicians do not expect to learn a brand new piece of music within 2 months. At least most musicians don't. When I performed a lot, I would give myself roughly twice as much time as it would take for me to learn a piece of music. If it was a relatively simple piece of music, maybe it was a 2 to 4 pager, I'd give myself about maybe 6 months, even if it would take me about 3. And sometimes I'd be surprised. Sometimes I would learn it in 2, maybe I would learn it in 4, but I would have a nice cushion, comfortable cushion, so that I wouldn't have to rush. I would allow myself to make those small and consistent improvements over time, which is significantly better than a lot of improvement in one shot. Remember, small and consistent improvements over time, that's what's going to last. That's what's going to get encoded into long-term memory. So have realistic expectations. That's obviously going to depend on your level. If you're a beginner, don't expect to learn Recuerdos del Alambre in a year. You have to develop all the techniques building up to that. If you're maybe an intermediate guitarist and you can assess the difficulty level of a piece of music, then give yourself a little extra cushion. If you think it's going to take you 2 to 3 months, give yourself maybe 4 to 6 months. And sit back and be comfortable with that process. Be patient, and if you're consistent and you do everything right, then you will get to your goal potentially faster than you think, and worst case scenario, you'll reach the end of your cushion time and you'll feel super comfortable with that. Along with reason number 1, which was relaxation, reason number 12 is also the most important thing you can do for significant improvement in guitar, and that is to work with a music coach rather than just a music teacher. Now, most successful athletes, business people, musicians, all artists, they have worked with a music coach and with a music teacher. The difference between the two is that a teacher typically teaches you new knowledge and skills and expects you to develop those on your own, whereas a coach helps you develop those skills to a high level by guiding you through effective practice strategies, giving you personalized feedback, and constantly pushing you to improve. And they typically do that around 3 to 5 days a week. You can just think of how coaches work with professional athletes. They're working with them 5-6 days a week. They're not necessarily teaching them new things, but they are helping them develop their skills to a higher level. They're helping them see errors that they're making that the athletes don't necessarily see. And a music coach does the same thing. Now, one big sign that you need a music coach is that you're practicing a lot, but you're not improving. Other big signs are maybe that you're getting injured a lot, you have a hard time organizing your practice time, maybe your music falls apart when you play in front of others. That's a real big one that I used to struggle with. If any of that is you and you're tired of running in circles, then what you really need to do is stop trying to figure it out on your own. You don't need to do that. Instead, work with a music coach who can help you succeed. Now, I've been playing and teaching professionally for well over 20 years, and in that time, I have taught over 20,000 lessons. I performed over 1,000 times. I've gone through the multiple failures and successes it takes to understand how to succeed in guitar. And whether you're just playing for fun or you want to play professionally, I would be honored to be your music coach and help you succeed in guitar. If you're feeling stuck in your progress, or maybe you just want to make sure you have a system that helps you practice the right way, then really your best solution is to work with a music coach. So if you're serious about your improvement, click on the Spanish Guitar Mastery link in the description below so you can learn how working directly with me can help you succeed in guitar. See you there.